Information Risk with David Loshin, powered by Insight Jam.
It's Doug Atkinson here with David Loshin for the Information Risk podcast. And this has been a lot of fun, this series. We're going through the different categories of information risk. And David has brought another example with him today that we're going to get into, which is rather interesting and a little controversial. Welcome, David. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks again. This has been great. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Yeah, well, I am too. And we shared a few notes back and forth prior to starting up today. But why don't you dive into it? It's an interesting case study in the early stages of kind of deep big data analytics.
So yeah, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna refer to a story that was in the New York Times about 12 years ago or so. It was called what was it? What was it called? Where should I put my? There it is.
It's How Companies Learn
Your Secrets by Charles Duhigg. And he actually wrote a book after this that included this as one of the chapters, or it was adapted into one of the chapters called Habits, which you probably have heard of. And the story here is a report where he talks about different types of consumer analytics or consumer behavior analytics that big companies like Walmart, Target, Sears, and Sears was around at the time, but they're not around anymore. But how these companies are able to take the historical data associated with customer activity and be able to use that to learn out what their preferences are, what kind of behaviors they're going to do. And the article is actually pretty comprehensive and describes the type of analytics that a company might do, where they would be able to collect all the consumers or the purchasers' purchases, and where it took place, when it took place, how frequently the customer comes into the store. Look at all these different types of characteristics associated with the customer, and then be able to use that to predict what kind of products that customer might want to buy. And I am giving the article somewhat short shrift. It's a relatively long article, and it's really worth reading. The key part of this article that I want to call out is a story that is included in the article. And the story goes like this. It first talks about one of the individuals who is a data scientist who works for Target, who is being interviewed about the type of analytics that the company would do, and about how that the company said, well, if we could determine when women were pregnant, or when people were pregnant, we could be able to provide them with better products that would be appropriate for people who are in that stage of pregnancy or different stages of pregnancy. So he described that a company like Target could collect information and would be able to potentially put together a model that could predict when a customer was pregnant.
It's a nuanced. So the marketing department comes to the data analytics team and it says, if we knew when somebody was pregnant, that's when people. So what usually the standard is people see a birth. Companies gather birth notices, and they mail out. And by the time they've gotten a birth notice, they're getting diluted in terms of the massive amounts of offers that are going out to people who now obviously are in a different state of being in a family, and they're buying different products. And the marketing behavior is, when there's a huge life event like that, people are up for grabs in their loyalty and their behavior.
Right. And if you're doing it the way that you just described, it's too late.
Yeah, well, that's it. They were hoping to go to the analytics department and say, could we tell somebody's pregnant rather than that they've already just had a baby? Which is what you'd want your marketing department to ask the analytics department.
Right. I mean, if I know that you had a baby because I saw a registration of a birth certificate, or I saw a birth announcement in a newspaper, it's too late to sell you a car seat, because you had to bring that baby home already. And if you had to bring that baby home, you already would have bought a car seat. So this is exactly what what a marketing department wants to do, which is I want to identify when a customer needs something before they've already decided what they want to get, because I want to provide them with the option to buy one from me. And that's what companies do. And that's okay. And we'll get back to this. But I want to kind of dive into the story. And I am reading from the article, and if anybody wants to get a link to the article, contact me. My contact information I think will be given at the end.
Yep.
So I can send you a link to the article. But I'm quoting right here. It says, about a year after this data scientist created his pregnancy prediction model, a man walked into a Target outside Minneapolis and demanded to see the manager. He was clutching coupons that had been sent to his daughter, and he was angry, according to the employee who participated in the conversation. Quote, "My daughter got this in the mail," he said. "She's still in high school, and you're sending her coupons for baby clothes and cribs. Are you trying to encourage her to get pregnant?" The manager didn't have any idea what the man was talking about. He looked at the mailer. Sure enough, it was addressed to the man's daughter and contained advertisements for maternity clothing, nursery furniture, and pictures of smiling infants. The manager apologized and then called a few days later to apologize again. On the phone, though, the father was somewhat abashed. "I had a talk with my daughter," he said. "It turns out there's been some activities in my house I haven't been completely aware of. She's due in August. I owe you an apology." So that's the story. Now, what's interesting to me is that this is one of those stories that it was created on the 6th day of creation and has taken on a life of its own. And that there are so many references in so many different papers and articles. And I've seen this story referenced in other, mass media articles. I've seen it referenced in academic journals, and yet it's just a story, right? And I guess that's the stumbling block that I have with this, is that the nature of this story is so. There's two aspects to it. It is so unbalanced in terms of level of detail that it strikes me as reminiscent of an urban legend. Now, I'm not calling into question the author's veracity. I'm sure he did his research and everything is all above board. But the way the story is presented, you've got unnamed characters in some, like when you've got this, you walked into a Target outside Minneapolis. Well, Minneapolis is the home of Target. And so how many Targets are there going to be in, outside Minneapolis? I know that, within spitting distance from my house, there's at least 4 Targets. So there's a lot of Targets all over the place. So an unnamed location that is outside the main home headquarters town of Target, an unnamed man, an unnamed manager, coupons have been sent to his daughter, which, in high school, implying that his daughter, that somehow Target already knows who his daughter is and has enough information about his daughter to be able to send a flyer to that individual. And not only that, given again the presumption of Target and their advanced pregnancy prediction model, they've got a history of purchases associated with the daughter to be able to have used this pregnancy prediction model to determine that individual was pregnant. And so, I'm not going to say that there's I'm not casting aspersion on the author. I'm just saying that my questionable meter started ringing a little bit.
The BS.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to say that, but yeah, a little bit. So again, and there's like the direct quotations of the individuals, but it's
all anonymous.
It's
very anonymous.
It's all anonymous, right? It's anonymous, and so it raises a couple of questions for me, which is Target, and this is the main core of the conversation is Target able to determine if I'm pregnant? And if Target is able to determine if I'm pregnant, what should Target do with that information? And I think that these are all just kind of a subsidiary set of questions associated with predictive analytics in general, which is if I replace the getting pregnant with any characteristic or any life change or any expected event associated with a customer, is a company capable of using predictive analytics to predict that event or that characteristic is going to take place? And if they can, what's the benefit of doing that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna hold some of those questions, David, for a little later on, because there's a few other things I want to get down into. So first things first, what kind of risks are we talking about here? So we're talking about information risk. I mean, this is a case where you've got a company with making predictive analytics decisions that clearly, according to the example, the real world example, caused a customer to be upset. We've started to look through this podcast at data governance as a collection of data risk. What do you see this? Where do you see this falling into in terms of category of data risk?
So this one is juicy because it hits a bunch of we had about 7 or 8 categories of risk, of information risk. The first one I'm going to touch on is what we refer to as compliance risk with respect to privacy. So is a customer entitled to having their private information protected? Now, in 2012, there was not the plethora or the overwhelming number of data privacy laws, but this is exactly the type of thing that is called out directly in a lot of the text of data privacy laws.
Yeah. So if my daughter goes into a Target and buys a pregnancy test under her own quote unquote Target loyalty card, is that covered under HIPAA? I mean,
Okay. So first of all, congratulations. I think you may have stumbled upon the algorithm for the predictive model of whether an individual is pregnant.
They bought a pregnancy test.
They bought a pregnancy test. I mean, yes. I mean, this is again.
Did they buy one, or did they buy another one a week later?
Right. Yeah. Right. So this is a whole nother conversation, which is how reasonable are these predictive models in terms of common sense versus
a data point of one
reliance on but again, we'll table that for next week or a couple of weeks from now. No, a Target is not Target. The part of Target that is selling health and beauty aids is not subject to HIPAA because they're not a healthcare provider. They may be for the CVSs that are included inside Target, but no, Target's not subject to HIPAA, but Target is subject to a law like the California Consumer CPRA, Consumer Privacy Rights Act, or whatever it is, where it talks about the types of data that are protected under the law that you are not allowed to share with other organizations, and you're only limited to use it for a particular set of purposes, such as to complete a transaction. So that is called out under the shopping behaviors or inferences based on shopping behaviors. That's one example where you actually have that explicit in the law. I'd have to go back and dig up the actual text of the law to tell you how they phrase it. But I recall reading that there's very, very broad array of different types of data that is considered to be personal information that is protected. So no, it's not HIPAA, but it is covered under some kind of law.
So is it compliant? So is this compliance risk, or is this different?
So I would raise the question as to whether that's a compliance vulnerability. If I go out to the customer and say, congratulations on your impending birth, that's probably a violation. But if I send them a bunch of ads for cribs and onesies and
diapers,
stuff like that, and diapers, no, it's probably not a violation. So it's a little bit fuzzy. But then I also, again, this goes back to my BS meter, which is twofold. One is, have you ever gotten a flyer from a store in the mail And if you did you sit down to like read through it, or did you like kind of glance at it and then throw it into the garbage?
And recognize it as like speaking to you at a level that you've never been spoken to before, to the point where you're going to rush down there.
Yes, that's number one. And number two, I look at ads, even when I do look at these ads, they're not, like I get something from the supermarket. It's not like, 20 different ads for different types of soda. It's produce and canned fish and soda and chips and meat.
Yeah,
and,
but if it truly knew me, why would it include Brussels sprouts in that flyer? I mean, honestly.
Well, right. That's a perfect example, right? If it really did know you, and then it wouldn't include those things in the flyer. And yes, I will say that companies will customize flyers to be sent out, but I don't believe that they are customizing flyers for individuals. I mean, I might do it.
I don't see how that would make any sense with the margins that the supermarket are working under.
Right. I mean, like I can see it in electronic and e-commerce ads, but to actually craft a separate flyer that is effectively customized to each customer, because if they can build a prediction model for pregnancy, they can also build a prediction model for alcoholism, and they can build a prediction model for people getting married, and a prediction model for whatever other characteristic or life event that might take place. So let's say that happens. Am I going to now start saying, okay, well, Doug, you're pregnant and you're an alcoholic, so
and you don't like Brussels sprouts, right?
So I'm going to send you a flyer for cribs that have an embedded alcohol cabinet. I mean, like to what extent do you take this? So the question is, even if a company is going to make use of that information and it's personal information, there's ways to get around the presentation of that knowledge that bypasses the compliance risk.
Yeah. So right. So we're really talking, ironically, about an opportunity risk to the organization, right? I think it's that there may be overreading the tea leaves, if you will.
Yes, you're hitting the nail on the head, which is if they are looking at these things in isolation, right? I've got a pregnancy model and I've got a wedding model and whatever. If they're looking at customer behaviors on a one-by-one event basis, then they're missing the perspective of the multi-channel long-term view of the customer, which is that it's not really about selling a car seat to a woman who is about to have a baby or a couple who's about to have a baby. It's rather, there's a couple, they've gotten married, they're starting to have children, they may have more than one. How do I establish the relationship with that family in the role that they are playing as new parents, and with the expectation that they're not going to be new parents after the next couple of years, and they might have more children, and when they have their second child, they're probably going to need to buy more car seats, or as their children grow, they need to buy more car seats. But as their children grow more, they're going to get rid of their car seats and they're going to buy them cars, right? So like the perspective is, I want to have a good relationship with what I mean is I as a company want to have a good relationship with my customers so that they will have some degree of loyalty to purchasing things from us over the lifetime of that relationship.
Well, this is exactly right. And ultimately, the first rule of marketing is don't create a negative impression. And so, I think your point about opportunity risk is you don't want to over analyze to the point where you're sending offers that are off-putting because they're
right, and that
too on point or too off point
or too creepy, and once it becomes creepy, that becomes yet another one of our categories, which is reputation risk, which is after this article comes out, and now Target has a PR issue, which is that this guy wrote an article that basically said Target is checking everybody's underwear, right? Target is looking at what you're doing and is making predictions.
That's the New York Times throwing you into that shiny light.
Right. And how do you deal with that? And how, like two guys coming up to me after I talk at a technical conference and tell me that story wasn't true. That's not a corporate message that conveys a positive image of what Target is doing with the data that it's collecting.
Right on. All right. I'm going to stop you there. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back, and I've got a few more questions that we're going to dig into.
Want more Insight Jam? Follow us on Instagram for exclusive content like a daily dose of best practices and buying advice from industry experts and leading solution providers. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel for long-form highlights from our expert panel discussions. And if you prefer to listen, please rate and review the Insight Jam podcast on Apple, Spotify, or Google. The Solutions Review team is hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so don't miss out. Now, let's get back to the show.
All right, we are back. And David, I have a few questions I want to start to dive in now regarding that example and really the broader implications, or I guess the broader category of business intelligence going on here, and that is predictive analytics. In the first place, what would you consider to be the value proposition here?
So I struggle with this a lot, especially when talking to clients in projects that we work on, which is that there's typically a one-sided view of return on investment or value. Yet in any scenario where there's multiple parties involved, the value proposition has to be defined in the context of adding value to all the different parties. And in any one case, it actually might be possible that the cumulative value that is being delivered to the collection of parties might be greater than the perception of value that any single party can get. So a quick simple example of that is when you have a house. Somebody's looking to buy a house, somebody's looking to sell a house, and you've got a broker who is dealing with both of them. And the value proposition for the seller is to get the highest price for the house. And the value proposition for the purchaser is to get the lowest price for the house. But for the broker, the highest value proposition is maximizing the price that the purchaser is willing to pay and that the seller is willing to take so that they can get the biggest commission on the sale. So if the seller asks for $10,000 and the buyer wants to offer $9,000 and they're both very adamant about not changing, then there's no value because the seller doesn't sell the house, the buyer doesn't get a house, and there's no commission. Now, if the broker can convince the seller to go to $9,500 and convince the buyer to go to $9,500, then there's increased value overall because the seller gets to sell the house, although the seller doesn't get the amount of money that the seller originally wanted. So it's not the maximum for the seller, but it's still some value. And the same thing for the purchaser. The purchaser is paying more than the purchaser wanted to pay, but still is getting a house. So the value to the purchaser is still there, but it's not as great as it would be if it were the ideal circumstance for the purchaser. For the broker might then also have to say, well, I'll take a cut on my commission to make this deal happen. So I will cut my commission by $500 so that the purchaser, or by some amounts that is equally split between the difference of what the seller wants to sell, the purchaser wants to buy. And now the broker's not happy 100% either, but the broker's happy at least in getting some commission as opposed to getting no commission. So in that scenario, all three individuals are not getting the maximal benefit, but they're all getting greater benefit than if the transaction didn't take place. And so let's abstract that out and look at it in any business scenario. Is that if I'm a company and I want to use predictive analytics to sell more stuff to my customers, that's different than if I'm using predictive analytics to sell the right stuff to the right customers. And because if I want to try to sell more stuff, then I'm trying to take advantage of them. But if I'm trying to find out what they want and find the best options for them making the right choice, maybe they would have paid a little bit more to my company than they would have paid if they had spent 2 weeks shopping around to find the right thing and to get the right price. But they've saved 2 weeks of hassle in trying to find the right thing at the right price because I brought it to them in the first place. And that's when I talk about value proposition. What I'm talking about is how do we maximize value for all of the parties involved through the use of an analytical technique.
Well, it's interesting because at least online, and the example that we were using earlier is a very analog example. There's certainly some digital technology making the predictive analytics, but the delivery of the messaging is very much an analog delivery through flyers and mail. But the idea, and it's interesting. I was just traveling with some guys down on a golf trip, and we were chatting about different airfares that we paid. And one of the guys who got the cheapest airfare said, "Well, I never search for airfare in a browser that has cookies on it. I always go to a incognito browser so that they can't serve me based upon what I've already been searching for in terms of that trip." And he believes, and he got the lowest airfare, so I think we all were impressed. He believed that he was being served a higher price based upon the fact that they already knew where he wanted to go. And so there's a whole lot of complications as you start to overlay what you were mentioning, this idea of a digital presentation where now you're presenting offers and pricing and specials and promotions in a very individual way based upon cookies and based upon a much more complex persona.
So you're sticking a key into a Pandora's box of conversation, because in fact what you're pointing out is that we are inadvertently being controlled through our actions by media channels who are making choices about what information is being served to us electronically. And so if you go to Google News, and so Google News is an aggregator, and they're collecting articles and presenting them to you, but they change what they are presenting to you based on what you click on. So in fact, you're not getting the news, you're getting an automatically curated set of content that is hiding under the name of news, but in reality it's just what Google wants you to be clicking through to, so that you will buy the things that their advertisers are selling.
As a publisher, I consider this to be the third rail for me. I mean, the fact that we're being served these echo chamber bubbles of information that the analytics machines know we will react to, and oftentimes it's the opposite of what we want to see because it's so outrageous to us that we click. I mean, I honestly believe that we're being served sometimes a very contradictory collection of information.
You're not wrong.
In order to outrage us, in order to drive a click to the outraged
You are absolutely correct. And in fact, this is what mass communications theorists study, is is how, the presentation of content is driving behaviors instead of monitoring behaviors. And again, there's enough juicy stuff for us to talk about in that area that we'll reserve that for another conversation. But
we'll have to get back to that because the idea that media revenue is driven by clicks inevitably creates the worst possible media output.
But it also creates a conflict of interest that most media consumers don't even realize is there, which is that it is no longer to. You really are diverting us from the topic.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm just gonna say it, which is that a media company no longer has, it is more motivated to get you to click on stuff than to deliver accurate news, which raises questions about journalistic appropriateness. And again, like I'm throwing it out there, and then you're right. Pull me back in because we will.
We're not too far afield because let's get back to where we were, which is what are a company's responsibilities with regard to using results of predictive analytics? I mean, where does is there an ethics quagmire here, or is it just simply what we were talking about earlier, the reputation risk and ultimately the opportunity risk?
So to answer that, I think I need to unwind a little bit because it's not like somebody woke up in 2012 and suddenly discovered that a company can collect information about a customer and then use that to benefit the customer. And so, let's think about this going back to the olden days when there was the, Sam's General Store down at the corner, and you'd walk in there and you'd say, I need to get 2 pounds of flour, and he'd open up a huge sack of flour and measure out 2 pounds and put it into a bag for you, and et cetera. It was one individual who was managing an inventory of products, but if he knew that, Mr. Johnson or Mrs. Johnson or one of their kids came in every Wednesday morning to buy 2 pounds of flour, he might, on Tuesday night, pre-measure out 2 pounds of flour and mark Mr. Johnson on the side of the bag, knowing that at 9 a.m. Mr. Johnson is going to show up and he's going to ask for 2 pounds of flour. Now, is that necessarily going to be always correct? I mean, it could be that Johnson's family reunion is this weekend, and instead of 2 pounds of flour, they need 15 pounds of flour. But that's exactly what predictive analytics is, which is based on the patterns of behavior of an individual in the past. Can I predict what their anticipated need is going to be, and then be able to deliver that to them before they ask for it? And so, predictive analytics didn't get discovered in the 2000s. It's been around for centuries. Okay. So it's not that. And then you've got companies who've been collecting data about individuals through however many various means. I don't know if you recall, when I was a kid, you were probably a kid around the same time that I was a kid. Comic books, in the back of the comic books, they would have these advertisements for a company where you could buy X-ray glasses and what do they call those? The brine shrimp. What do they call that?
Sea monkeys.
Sea monkeys, right? Sea monkeys. Now, the behavior of a customer who is willing to shove $1.50 into an envelope and send it off to a company to buy a set of sea monkeys is a behavior that a company, the company's sea monkeys, or brine shrimp, they can manufacture that, the little plastic container, whatever. That's not the value proposition for sea monkeys or X-ray glasses, or if you're reading, Field and Stream, the advertisement for the nose hair clipper. They're not looking for people who really want to buy nose hair clippers. They're looking for people who are willing to react to an advertisement in a print medium and actually take some real action to execute a transaction. I mean, who needs a nose hair clipper? You can just use scissors, I guess.
No,
or you can.
I have a book in my office. It's by a guy named John Caples. He wrote it in the 50s. He was the guy who said, they laughed at me when I sat at the piano, and then they heard me play. He had measured advertising through direct mail for decades, from the 30s through the 50s or 60s, and then he wrote a book. These are the 29 headlines that work. And
I'm looking on my bookshelf. I got a book called Database Marketing from 1980s.
Yeah,
which talks, right. I mean, it's not like this. So when you ask about it, is there, what's the company's responsibilities, and it goes back to what's the expectations of what a company wants to get out of doing this analytics. And the benefit for Sam at the general store is if he knows that he's got 30 customers and each one of them buys a certain amount of flour each week, then he buys the amount of a little more flour than he believes his customers are going to buy, so that he doesn't take up extra room on the shelf with flour he's not going to sell. And that's the same idea, just multiply it by 3 or 4 orders of magnitude, and now you've got Amazon.com, which is they do customer analytics to determine how to pre-deliver materials to warehouses close to where they believe people are going to buy things, which is how they can get you, you can order that Brita filter or whatever it is, and it gets delivered to your house in 4 hours.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna. I'm so tempted to go into, if Sam down at the local store knows you're going to buy 2 pounds of flour, does he sell it to you at a higher price because he knows you're going to buy it, than to somebody who walks through the door and says, "What's on sale?"
Well, I mean, when Sam was running his general store, that's the only store that was there. So if you want a flour, you got to pay whatever price. He's gonna. But what he could do, I mean, like if he was Target, what he would do is he would say, "Oh, you're buying flour. Well, I could sell you cornmeal also. You can here's a great recipe for cornbread, and but it takes both flour and cornmeal. So if I can sell you cornmeal at a discount if you buy more flour." So yeah, he could do that, but he's probably so busy like hammering horseshoes onto horses in the back when nobody was in the store, and shoveling out hay, whatever. I mean, it's a matter of scale. But when it comes to today's e-commerce marketers, they're looking to maximize their profit, but do so in a way that is a good experience for the customer.
So let's put a bow on this particular section of our conversation. I mean, obviously companies are doing this, and they're doing it ever more sophisticatedly, and they're also going to now be able to do it with a layer of AI on top that is going to take it to a whole nother level, one could argue. I don't think there's any question. So what should a company be concerned with regard to the kind of broader category of predictive analytics and marketing? Where's the risk for the organization?
So the risk is there's a couple of facets here. One is they are going to be using models and then starting to trust the model as if it were an oracle. I used that term when we were chatting before. If I've got all this data and I'm bringing it in and I'm using machine learning and generative AI essentially to create a predictive model that is based on what the analysis is determining is the most predicted behavior considering the data that it's got at its fingertips. And so if I have biased data, if I have low quality data, if I have data that's missing characteristics, the model doesn't care. The model is going to predict what the model predicts based on what it sees. And so this is how you start getting into hot water, because you end up with these models that are making predictions that are based on things that you don't realize what the key characteristics are. And you're making, if you divest yourself of responsibility for making decisions to an artificial intelligence entity, then you are putting your organization at risk to be doing things that are outside of your administrative control. And so there's so many examples of this. One example was the an AI tool that was being used to during COVID to predict whether an individual needed to be brought into the hospital or not. But the characteristics associated with people of one race were much more refined in terms of whether they were brought into the emergency room, perhaps because people, white people living in middle or high income neighborhoods are more likely to get service at a hospital, while Hispanic or Black communities living near overwhelmed community hospitals have less likelihood of getting the same kind of service. But then when you look at the cases, it then would say, okay, well, white people are more likely to need hospitalization than Black people, because the history says that more white people are being brought into the hospital. But that's not. It's not. That's an unfair decision, and it's not based on an individual's medical knowledge. It's based on an AI's training on flawed data. So there's a big chasm that you can fall into when you start looking at relying on analytics as your decision mechanism.
Very good. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll wrap things up with David and get into some very specific questions about predictive analytics.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today. Now back to the show.
All right, David. I want to turn it all the way back to the first segment we did, and really delve into whether Target really knows that a customer is pregnant or not, and whether they should really trust the output of a data science activity like predictive analytics.
So that's good because we're kind of building on what we were just saying before the break. It's the question is whether any predictive model is believable, and the degree to which it is believable, and the degree to which believing it is going to add value. So we were talking earlier about value proposition, and then we were after that talking about the potential risks associated with having flawed data being used for building a model. And so does Target really know that a customer is pregnant? And again, let's roll this back to 2012, so that we're not talking about generative AI. We're talking about the typical types of predictive analytics that were being done at the time, which are pretty well established models that have been around for 20 or 30 years, and some of them may have even been less sophisticated than we like to believe. They may have been just what we were talking about before, that the customer bought a pregnancy test, then a week later bought another pregnancy test. Maybe that's the predictive model, that if somebody is unwilling to believe that the first test came out positive, that they're willing to go out and buy another test, that then
bought a jar of pickles, and then bought
exactly. So does Target really know that a customer is pregnant? No. I'm not going to say that any predictive model is all knowing and is able to always be accurate and correct in its prediction. And I'll go back to and it's to a company like Target's benefit to not rely on that in an explicit way. And the example that I give is my wife told me very early on in our marriage, when we were first having kids, and there were other couples in our neighborhood who were also having kids. She said, never ask a woman if she's pregnant because she might just be fat. And so, the story in the article, again, kind of demonstrates the other side, which is, don't tell a girl's father that she's pregnant when he doesn't believe that she's pregnant. But it doesn't really matter. No company is going to come out explicitly, to say, oh, congratulations that you're pregnant, or sorry to hear about your cancer diagnosis, and that's based on, their purchase history of whatever they're buying at CVS or whatever. These are predictive, but they're based on probabilistic models. They're based on statistical models. They're based on, neural networks,
and
those
by
types
that
of
very
things.
nature, they're not 100%.
They're not exactly
the board, right. You're going to get some number wrong, and that's not acceptable if you're in the marketing department to get, even if it's a small percentage. If you're whiffing 33% of the time.
Yeah, and
you can't.
But there's lots of good uses for predictive models, especially in like the area of healthcare. So a good example is for pharmaceuticals that are supporting clinical trials for new therapies for cancer, and they want to find patients who are most likely to respond well to those therapies. So they use predictive models to look at the other patients who have had these therapies used, who had a successful outcome, and then be able to say, are the characteristics associated with those patients, is that enough of predictive information to be able to identify additional individuals that can be pulled into that clinical trial? And there's a lot of value in that. Again, in that same perspective of value proposition, which is there's value to the patient in getting a innovative therapy that might cure them of a sickness that otherwise they wouldn't get cured of, and it's beneficial to the researcher to be able to develop research artifacts and papers and those types of things that are based on analyzing the results of the trial. And it's beneficial to the pharmaceutical company because they can figure out which of their drugs are working and which ones are not working. I think what you were kind of pushing before is on the one hand, is there a reasonable expectation? Yes, companies should be able to analyze customer data and be able to achieve the benefits when there is that value proposition. But I think where you're going is if they are doing that, what are the steps that they should take to make sure they're not going to fall off the side of the cliff when it comes to those other risks, the opportunity risks, the compliance risks, and the reputation risks? I think that's what you're asking me, right?
Yeah. So what are the reputation risks with regard to that? I mean, in addition to, obviously ending up on the business section of the New York Times, I mean, where else can you run afoul for your organization?
Well, I think it's really more looking at understanding the scenarios in which the results of those analyses should be done. And I think that this is a key challenge in a lot of organizations that have invested a huge amount in developing a data science program or a data science practice without the controls of understanding what the expectation is for how the result's going to be used, and be able to say, well, what are the potential risks associated with the use of this result, as opposed to what's the potential benefits. So I think that an organization has to have some framework for reviewing what the expectations are for both the positive outcomes of some analysis and the potential negative outcomes. So if we'll use the pregnancy example again, if Target is going to, or any company is going to have a pregnancy prediction model, what are the benefits? We already talked about the benefits. They could be bundling products for the customer that might make it easier for them, when it comes to making decisions about stocking their new baby's room. It's a benefit to the company because they can sell more stuff and they can sell the greater volumes of stuff. On the other hand, like my wife says, you don't want to ask somebody if they're pregnant, and similarly, I wouldn't there is a risk of sending out a flyer with a bunch of solely targeted pregnancy ads. So, what is it that the company wants to achieve? Well, they want, if the goal is not sell more stuff, but rather establish a better relationship, then how does knowledge or knowledge of a potential pregnancy improve your ability to enhance that relationship? And that's a kind of a difficult question to answer.
Well, and I think, as I recall, that article, part of the article was, again, back to the original question from the marketing team to the analytics team, was if we know when somebody's going to be having a significant change in life, that is when they're most likely to break their habits and be in play for the other things that they're not buying from us, right? So you're trying to create a certain amount of, you're looking for the opportunity to extend your relationship into all the other things, obviously, that Target sells. And I think that's probably similar with any larger, offering that, either retail or banking or whatever it is.
Yeah. And so it's, I think the goal there is to do it, to use the results in a way that seems beneficial without being creepy. And so,
well, that's it, right? You want to be able to extend your financial relationship without damaging your loyalty relationship, I guess. Yeah. The kind of already habitual relationship.
Yeah. And your point is spot on about where are these cracks in behavior patterns or habit patterns that allow a change of behavior. And that is actually a much more foundational aspect of the world that we live in today, because now everybody, and this goes back to what we were saying before about journalism, everybody wants to manipulate your behavior somehow. And we've gone through 2 decades of people not really understanding that when they are getting if they can't figure out what the product is, they're the product, right? If they're getting a free service from Google, and they sign away the rights to allow Gmail to automatic or LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever to automatically scan their use of their services so that they can post ads, whether it's subtle or not. I mean, eventually you are, everybody is subject to influence.
So is it your experience working with clients that you don't necessarily always have to have the latest weaponry in the digital game, or is it just simply, we need all of this analytics, we need the latest stuff, and we need to do it at a highest level, and we need to take all this risk to market it what we consider to be the most sophisticated way, because otherwise I don't feel like I'm doing my job, or that I'm, realizing my career goals
or are we maintaining competitiveness with the other people in our market? And I think
it's like, it is kind of like an arms race that almost similar to the arms race gets so ridiculous that you have exponential abilities to blow each other out of the world. You don't need the next levels.
But the reality is that it's not. And because it's hard to get things done and changed in big organizations. And this goes back to one more aspect of this whole Target story, which is for them to be successful and be able to make use of a pregnancy prediction algorithm. How many Target stores are there? How many Target store managers are there? How many Target store workers are there that need to be aware of what Target is doing in terms of this approach of, well, we're doing specialized marketing to individuals that we have identified based on some predictive model? I mean, if the guy in the store, if they send out a flyer to this girl for cribs, and she says, "Oh, Target's got a sale on cribs. Let me go to some Target outside of Minneapolis, and I'm going to go to the crib department." And lo and behold, there is no crib department because this Target doesn't sell cribs. So if there's no ability to execute on these things, then it's just an intellectual exercise. And organizations don't work as well as machines. Organizations are made up of technology and information and people. And people have, like machines typically, work until they break down, but people just are largely unpredictable in certain ways, and that's why there's all these, there's occupational behavioral studies that are looking at how people work, together in organizations. But you got to be able to execute on the outcomes. And that's where we go back to saying, number one, what's the value proposition? Number two, what's the expectation of the results? And number three, what do you do to make sure that you're properly doing this? Well, you've got to have a process in place, and you've got to have a framework for how you're going to use these analyses and analytics. And you have to have a set of ethics that define when it's reasonable and useful to do it and when it's not. And you have to have training so that all the individuals involved are aware of this. And you've got to have oversight and governance. These are all the aspects that nobody ever thinks of when they say, oh my gosh, my competitor just started a data science team. We need to start a data science team. So you've got two companies who've got data scientists who are doing all sorts of analysis that nobody's ever going to use.
Yeah, so let me ask you this as we're kind of getting to the end here, because I think it's an important perspective to come from you. And that is, when should an organization look outside the organization to bring in someone like you who might be able to bring that larger perspective of what's happening outside the organization and maybe, get outside of the boxes that they're in, but also as a way to maybe unify what might be happening different levels within broader lines of business that aren't necessarily coordinating properly.
So this is like the allegory of the cave, where you've got people who are in the cave and they can see the shadows of people outside, but they have no idea that there's actually people outside. And the same thing with organizations. You work within an organization, you become adapted to the way the organization works. You don't realize that stuff goes on outside that may have, a positive impact on the way that you do the thing that you do, or that it can potentially improve the outcome. So yes, there's always a great opportunity for people to be, outsiders to be brought into an organization to kind of open the eyes of the people inside to think about what they're doing in a different way. An organization's got to be ready to take advantage of that as well. And I'm not talking about like outsourcing the building of some system, but rather really getting somebody to come in and ask those difficult questions of what does a customer get out of your predictive analytics project, and how are you going to sustain and scale up the use of those results in terms of how the different staff and people on members of the employee pool are going to be making use of this, and what's their role and what's the benefit to them to this as well. So there's lots of opportunities for providing insights to really assessing the underlying risks and vulnerabilities and opportunities that these different technologies can provide.
Well, again, this has been a fascinating conversation. We could keep going on, but we're going to wrap it up now. I want to make a challenge to any of the folks who are watching to bring your examples to the show. David is nothing if not nimble and incredibly scholarly, and he's up for the challenge. So bring whatever you find out there that you'd like us to delve into in terms of examples similar to the Target example, or any other examples that you see that you'd like us to discuss. Submit them in the comments section here, or you can come to insightjam.com certainly and submit them there. You can also, if you come to insightjam.com, you can also connect with David directly. He has a expert space as one of our solutions review experts at insightjam.com. And certainly you can also connect with David outside of all of these mediums by going to Knowledge Integrity, and we have all of his contact information there. But David is available for individual conversations, individual consultations, and whatever else you might need. Truly a font of knowledge, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation, David. So thanks again for this one, and I'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, thanks a lot.